Have you ever had someone look you straight in the eye and reject not only you but your child, before that child even had a chance to be born? My father did. "I don't have this grandchild," he shouted, not in anger that faded after a few minutes, not in the heat of an argument. He said it with the cold certainty of a man making a decision he believed he would never regret. Then he pointed at the front door and told me to leave. That night I slept in my SUV in a grocery store parking lot outside Savannah, Georgia, 7 months after returning home from active military service. 48 hours later, a lawyer called. He told me my grandfather had left me $35 million. Every cent. But there was one condition. And what I discovered afterward forced me to confront a truth that would change everything I thought I knew about my family. My name is Emily Carter. This is the story of how my father lost his daughter long before he lost the fortune he thought belonged to him. My father used to tell people he was proud of me. Looking back, I think he was proud of the idea of me. Proud when strangers thanked him for having a daughter in the army. Proud when neighbors saw me in uniform during holidays. Proud when people at church shook his hand and said, "Frank, you raised a remarkable young woman." But being proud of someone in public and loving them in private are not always the same thing. I learned that slowly. The first warning signs appeared years before the night he threw me out. My mother died when I was 23. Cancer. Aggressive, fast. The kind that turns entire families into spectators. After she passed away, something changed inside my father. Some people become softer after loss. He became harder. Or maybe he had always been that way, and grief simply stripped away the parts he used to hide. My older brother Michael never seemed to notice. Michael was 40 years old and somehow perpetually in crisis. Every year there was something. A failed business. A truck payment he couldn't make. A girlfriend who left. A debt that suddenly needed covering. Some emergency always appeared. And somehow my father always found a way to rescue him. I was different. The Army teaches you many things, but one of the first is responsibility. If you make a mistake, you own it. If you fail, you fix it. Nobody is coming to save you. I built my life around that principle. I served overseas. Completed officer training. Made major before most people expected. Bought my own vehicle. Paid my own bills. When my father needed help replacing his roof 3 years earlier, I paid for half of it without hesitation. When Michael needed money after another failed venture, my father called me. Not to ask. To inform? Your brother needs help. The assumption was always that I would provide it. Sometimes I did. Sometimes I didn't. Each refusal created another crack in my relationship with my father. Then Ethan entered my life. Captain Ethan Brooks. Air Force. We met during a joint training exercise in Colorado. He was the kind of man who made quiet feel comfortable. Not because he talked constantly. Because he listened. We spent 2 years building something real. No drama. No games. No grand declarations. Just two people who understood service sacrifice and long periods apart. We planned to marry the following spring. Then his aircraft went down during a training accident. 3 men died that day. Ethan was one of them. There are moments in life when the world splits into before and after. That phone call was one of mine. I spent months functioning on habit. Wake up. Work. Exercise. Sleep. Repeat. The Army gave me structure. Structure carried me when emotion couldn't. Then one morning, almost 7 months after Ethan's death, I stared at a pregnancy test in my bathroom. Positive. I took another one. Positive. Then another. Positive. I sat on the floor for nearly an hour. Not because I was unhappy. Because I didn't know how to hold grief and joy at the same time. Yet somehow both were sitting beside me. Part of Ethan was still here. That realization made me cry harder than I had cried at his funeral. The first person I wanted to tell was my father, which now seems almost absurd. I waited 2 days, then drove to his house, the same house where I grew up. The same kitchen where my mother used to bake peach pies. The same dining room where my grandfather had sat every Thanksgiving for 30 years. My father was drinking coffee when I arrived. Michael was there too. Of course he was. He always seemed to be there lately. I sat down. My hands trembled slightly. "What's going on?" my father asked. I smiled. "I'm pregnant." For 1 second, nobody spoke. Then Michael looked surprised. My father looked confused. Then his expression changed. Not shock. Not concern. Something colder. His jaw tightened. His eyes narrowed. I remember every detail because trauma preserves moments with perfect clarity. "Who's the father?" he asked. "Ethan." Silence. I swallowed. He froze embryos before deployment. We were planning for a future. His coffee cup touched the table. Slowly. Deliberately. Then he stood. I don't have this grandchild. At first I thought I misunderstood. What? I said I don't have this grandchild. The room felt smaller. Dad, no. His voice rose. You bring a baby into this situation after that boy is gone. That boy had a name. His eyes flashed. I don't care. The words hit harder than I expected. Michael stared at the table, not defending me, not supporting me, just watching, the way people watch storms through windows. You are throwing your life away, my father said. I'm 32. You are destroying your military career. No, you don't know what you're doing. I stood. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. I came here because I thought you'd be happy. Happy, he laughed. One sharp, ugly laugh. Happy that my daughter is having a child with a dead man? The room went silent. I think part of me broke right then. Not dramatically. Not visibly. Just quietly. Like a rope finally snapping after years under tension. My father pointed toward the front door. Leave. I stared at him. You're serious. I've never been more serious. Dad, leave. Then came the final blow. If you go through with this, don't come back. I waited. Some part of me still expected him to stop. To apologize, to realize what he was saying. He didn't. Michael looked away. My father folded his arms, and I walked out. I slept in my SUV that night. A grocery store parking lot outside Savannah. The air smelled faintly of rain and asphalt. People pushed shopping carts beneath bright lights, while I sat alone behind tinted windows trying to understand how my life had changed so completely in less than an hour. Around midnight I called Ethan's old voicemail just to hear his voice. I listened, then listened again, then cried until there were no tears left. The next morning I began making plans. Temporary housing, medical appointments, financial calculations, the practical things. The things soldiers do when emotions become unmanageable. By the second afternoon I was sitting in my vehicle outside a diner when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Almost. Instead I answered, Emily Carter. Yes. My name is Gordon Reeves. The voice sounded professional. Measured. Careful. I'm calling regarding the estate of General Robert Carter. My grandfather. I sat up straighter. What about him? There was a pause. Then the lawyer said something that instantly changed the direction of my life. Miss Carter, your grandfather left you his entire $35 million estate. My heart stopped. Then came another pause, and 7 words that would change everything. But there is one condition attached. I spent the next 30 seconds staring through my windshield without actually seeing anything. Cars moved through the diner parking lot. A delivery truck backed toward a loading dock. Someone walked past carrying 2 paper bags. Normal life continued. Meanwhile, $35 million had just entered the conversation. And somehow that wasn't even the part that unsettled me most. The part that unsettled me was this. My grandfather had left everything to me. Not my father. Not my brother. Me. Miss Carter, Gordon Reeves asked. I realized I hadn't spoken. I'm here. Would you like me to explain? Yes. His voice remained calm. Professional. The voice of a man who spent his life delivering information that changed other people's futures. Your grandfather updated his estate plan approximately 8 months before his death. 8 months. I immediately did the math. That was long before my pregnancy. Long before my father disowned me. Long before any of the chaos that had consumed the past week. He named you sole beneficiary. I swallowed. What about my father? Another brief pause. He is not listed as a primary beneficiary. The words landed heavily. Not because I felt victorious. Because they didn't make sense. My grandfather loved my father, or at least I had always believed he did. Their relationship had been complicated at times, but never hostile. Certainly not hostile enough to explain $35 million. There must be some mistake. There isn't. He sounded certain. The documents have been reviewed multiple times. I rubbed my forehead. The pregnancy exhaustion had begun appearing more frequently over the previous week. My body felt heavier. My emotions sat closer to the surface. Nothing about this conversation felt real. Then Gordon said something even stranger. There's a condition attached to your inheritance. I sat up straighter. What kind of condition? You must reside at your grandfather's property in Asheville, North Carolina for 60 consecutive days. I blinked. That's it. Not exactly. Of course not. There are several requirements. I listened carefully. My grandfather's mountain property remained untouched since his death. The estate could not be transferred until I completed a process he had personally outlined. For 60 days I had to live in the house, review a collection of journals and documents he had left behind, complete a series of written acknowledgments prepared by his attorneys, and read every letter he had written before his death. Every single one. If I abandoned the process, the inheritance would automatically transfer to a veterans' charitable foundation. I sat quietly. The condition wasn't difficult. Odd, but not difficult. Why would he do that? Gordon exhaled slowly. General Carter was very specific about one thing. What? He said you would understand eventually. I stared through the windshield again. The diner sign buzzed softly outside. Understand what? Before I could ask, Gordon continued. There is transportation available whenever you're ready. When do I need to decide? You have 60 days from formal notification. I looked at the calendar on my phone. The clock had already started. 3 days later, I drove north. The journey from Georgia to North Carolina gave me too much time to think. The mountains appeared gradually. Rolling hills became ridges. Ridges became peaks. Clouds hung low over forests that seemed endless. By sunset, I turned onto a narrow private road. The property appeared through the trees, and for the first time in years I felt my grandfather's absence with fresh force. The house sat exactly as I remembered it. Large but not extravagant. Stone chimney. Dark wood exterior. Wide porch facing the mountains. General Robert Carter had spent 30 years building that place after retiring from the army. Every summer of my childhood seemed connected to those mountains. Fishing trips, bonfires, long conversations. Lessons disguised as stories. My grandfather had never lectured. He taught through examples. The front door opened before I reached it. A woman stepped outside. Mid-60s, silver hair, kind eyes. I recognized her immediately. Margaret Hayes, my grandfather's longtime housekeeper. Emily, her voice cracked slightly. She pulled me into a hug. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she looked at my face. Oh, sweetheart. The sympathy in her voice nearly broke me. Somehow strangers had shown me more compassion in 1 week than my father had. Margaret helped me bring my bags inside. The house smelled exactly the same. Wood polish, coffee, old books, mountain air. The scent hit me like a memory. For several minutes I simply stood there, looking, listening, remembering. He missed you, Margaret said quietly. I nodded. I missed him too. Dinner that night was simple. Soup, bread, tea. Afterward, Margaret handed me a brass key. Your grandfather left instructions. I turned the key over in my hand. What does it open? The study. I smiled sadly. Of course it did. The study had always been sacred territory. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, military photographs, maps, awards, letters. My grandfather spent thousands of hours in that room. I walked there after Margaret went home. The key turned smoothly. The door opened. The room looked frozen in time. His reading glasses sat on the desk. A half-finished notebook remained beside them. The lamp still faced the leather chair he used every evening. For a second I could almost imagine he had stepped outside and would return any minute. Instead there was silence. On the desk sat a large wooden box. My name was written across the top. Emily. Nothing else. I sat down slowly, then opened it. Inside were dozens of envelopes, carefully organized. Dated. Labeled. Some looked years old. Others appeared recent. Beneath them sat several journals, financial records, legal folders, photographs, and a single handwritten note. I recognized his handwriting instantly. Strong, precise, military. The note contained only one sentence. Start at the beginning. So I did. The first letter was harmless. Childhood memories, stories about my grandmother, advice about leadership. The second letter was similar. Then the third. And the fourth? Hours passed. Outside darkness covered the mountains. Inside, the only light came from the desk lamp. Around midnight, I reached a newer group of letters. The tone changed. Subtly at first. Then dramatically. The entries became more serious. More personal. More urgent. I noticed something else. A name appeared repeatedly. Frank. My father. At first, I assumed it was coincidence. Then it happened again. And again. And again. Entire pages centered around him. My grandfather's observations, concerns, disappointments, questions. I felt unease settling into my stomach. The next envelope was dated only 6 months before his death. My fingers hesitated. Then I opened it. A folded letter slid onto the desk. I unfolded it carefully. The first sentence stopped me cold. Not because it was shocking, because it felt impossible. I read it once, then again, then a third time. The words remained unchanged, written in my grandfather's unmistakable handwriting. If you're reading this, your father has already betrayed you. The room suddenly felt much colder, and for the first time since arriving in Asheville, I realized my grandfather hadn't left me $35 million simply to change my life. He had left me something else, the truth, and somehow he had known I would need it. I didn't sleep that night, not because of the inheritance, not because of the pregnancy, because of one sentence. If you're reading this, your father has already betrayed you. I must have read it 20 times, each time hoping I had misunderstood, each time reaching the same conclusion. My grandfather had written those words deliberately, not emotionally, not impulsively, deliberately. That was what frightened me. General Robert Carter was many things: disciplined, patient, methodical. He wasn't a man who made dramatic statements without evidence. If he wrote something like that, he had a reason. And somewhere inside the study surrounding me, that reason was waiting. The mountains outside remained dark. Wind brushed softly against the windows. The grandfather clock in the hallway marked each passing hour. I sat beneath the desk lamp and opened the next letter, then the next, and the next. By 3 a.m, a picture was beginning to emerge. Not complete, but recognizable. My father had been in financial trouble for years. Not because of his own lifestyle, because of Michael. Again. Always Michael. The letters described situations I vaguely remembered. Money disappearing from family accounts, loans that were never repaid, investments that somehow produced no returns, businesses that collapsed after receiving large amounts of cash. For years I had assumed these were ordinary family setbacks. My grandfather had seen something different, a pattern. The next morning I made coffee and continued reading. The study overlooked the eastern ridge. Sunlight filtered through the trees. Birds moved between branches. The world looked peaceful. The documents in front of me told a different story. One journal entry caught my attention immediately. It was dated nearly 4 years earlier. Frank withdrew another $60,000 today. Claims it is temporary. Claims Michael will repay it. Neither statement is true. I stared at the page. $60,000. The number felt enormous. Then I remembered something. 4 years earlier, Michael had launched another business. A landscaping company. He claimed investors were interested. He claimed contracts were coming. The company lasted 7 months, then vanished. I had never asked where the startup money came from. Apparently my grandfather knew. The further I read, the worse it became. $80,000 here, $30,000 there. Property refinanced, savings accounts drained. Promises made, promises broken, over and over. The tragedy wasn't simply the money, it was the trust. My grandfather kept giving my father opportunities to fix things, to tell the truth, to stop enabling Michael. Instead, both men continued digging deeper. Around noon, I found a sealed folder. Across the front were 3 handwritten words. For Emily only. I opened it carefully. Inside sat financial records, bank statements, property transfers, loan documents, everything organized with military precision. And suddenly the situation became much harder to dismiss. These weren't suspicions. These were facts, documented, verified, proven. My grandfather had spent years quietly tracking what was happening. A yellow sticky note rested on top. Emily, facts matter more than feelings. Always. Grandpa? I laughed softly despite myself. That sounded exactly like him. Then I started reading. 3 hours later, I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. The numbers were staggering. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. Possibly more. Money had flowed steadily toward Michael for over a decade. My father had funded almost every disaster. When savings ran low, assets disappeared. When assets ran low, loans appeared. When loans became difficult, someone else paid the difference. Sometimes that someone was my grandfather. Sometimes it was me. And that realization hit harder than anything else. Because suddenly I remembered all the moments. The unexpected requests, the emergencies, the urgent calls. Your brother needs help. Not asks, expectations. I had contributed thousands over the years. Not because Michael deserved it. Because I trusted my father. I trusted him. The realization left a bitter taste in my mouth. Late that afternoon, Gordon Reeves called. I updated him on my progress. Then I asked the question that had been growing in my mind all day. Did my grandfather know exactly what was happening? There was silence. Then Gordon answered carefully. Yes. The certainty in his voice surprised me. How can you be sure? Because I helped document some of it. I sat upright. What do you mean? General Carter retained our firm several years ago. My heartbeat quickened. He was concerned about protecting portions of the estate. From who? Another pause. Then, your father. The word landed heavily. Not because I hadn't suspected it. Because hearing another person say it made it real. For several seconds I couldn't speak. Gordon continued. Your grandfather loved your father. I know. He never stopped loving him. That hurt more than if he hadn't. Because I understood exactly what he meant. Some people break your heart without ever losing your love. Parents, children, family. Love survives things respect cannot. What happened? I asked. Eventually, your grandfather concluded that money was making the situation worse. I looked toward the mountain ridge outside the window. The trees moved gently in the wind. He believed your father would continue sacrificing everything to protect Michael. I closed my eyes. Because deep down I knew that was true. Then Gordon said something unexpected. Emily, there is another letter you haven't reached yet. I frowned. How do you know? Because your grandfather told me about it. My stomach tightened. What does it say? I don't know the contents. A brief pause. But I know where it is. He gave me directions. Specific shelf. Specific box. Specific envelope. When the call ended, I crossed the room immediately. The envelope was exactly where he described. Dated 8 months before my grandfather's death. The same period Gordon had mentioned regarding the updated will. I opened it carefully. Inside was a handwritten letter. Longer than the others. More personal. I recognized the change immediately. This wasn't a record. It was a goodbye. Emily, if you're reading this, I am gone. And if I know your father, he's already disappointed you. Perhaps worse. Those words alone made my chest tighten. I continued. The letter described my grandfather's final decision. Why he changed the will. Why he chose me. Why he excluded my father. Then I reached a sentence that made tears fill my eyes. Not because of the money. Because of what it revealed. You are the only Carter who still understands honor. I stared at the page for a long time. Honor. The word carried different meaning inside military families. It wasn't about medals, or uniforms, or public recognition. It meant integrity when nobody was watching. Doing what was right when it cost something. Keeping promises, accepting responsibility. My grandfather believed I had done that. And somehow that mattered more than $35 million. For a few minutes I simply sat there, holding the letter. Missing him? Then my phone vibrated. A text message. Unknown number. I opened it. 3 words appeared. We need to talk. Below them was another message. It's Dad. My stomach immediately tightened. A third message arrived seconds later. I know about the inheritance. Outside, clouds began gathering over the mountains. Dark. Heavy. Slow-moving. I stared at the screen. Then another message appeared. I'm coming to Asheville. Whether you like it or not. For several seconds I said nothing. Then I looked down at my grandfather's letter. At the words written in black ink. You are the only Carter who still understands honor. Something told me the next chapter of this story had finally arrived. And for the first time, my father wasn't coming to see his daughter. He was coming for the money. My father arrived in Asheville 2 days later. Not alone. Michael came with him. That fact told me everything I needed to know before either of them stepped out of the truck. Because if this visit were truly about repairing our relationship, Michael wouldn't have been there. He was there because this wasn't a family conversation. It was a negotiation. Or at least they thought it would be. I watched them pull into the driveway from the study window. The sky was overcast. Low clouds hung over the mountains. The kind of gray afternoon that makes the world feel suspended between seasons. Margaret happened to be in the kitchen when they arrived. She looked through the window, then looked at me. Do you want me to stay? I appreciated the question. Because she understood something important. Support isn't taking control. Support is simply standing nearby if needed. I smiled. No. She nodded, then quietly left through the back door. The knock came 30 seconds later. 3 sharp knocks. Confident. Entitled. My father had always knocked that way. As if every door already belonged to him. I opened it. For a moment nobody spoke. The last time we'd seen each other he had thrown me out of his house. Now he stood on my grandfather's porch. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Emily. His voice sounded softer than I remembered. Too soft. Carefully soft. The kind of voice people use when they want something. Dad. Michael offered an awkward nod. I returned it. No hugs followed. No apologies. No acknowledgement of what had happened. My father glanced toward my stomach. I was beginning to show slightly. Something flickered across his face. Not affection. Calculation. Then he smiled. I've been worried about you. The sentence was so absurd I almost laughed. Instead, I stepped aside. Come in. They entered. My father immediately began looking around. Not obviously, but I noticed the bookshelves, the furniture, the photographs, the house, cataloging, assessing, evaluating, the way investors inspect property, not the way grieving family members revisit memories. We sat in the living room. For several moments, silence lingered. Then my father cleared his throat. I made mistakes. There it was. The opening move. Simple. Controlled. Carefully rehearsed. I said nothing. He continued. When you told me about the baby, I reacted badly. Badly. Interesting choice of words, as though he had forgotten my coffee order. Not rejected his grandchild. I was emotional. Still, I said nothing. My father shifted in his chair. You know how much your mother meant to me. I almost admired the tactic. Almost. Because it was skillful. He wasn't discussing his actions. He was discussing his pain. Redirecting sympathy toward himself. A maneuver I'd seen him use for years. Unfortunately for him, I had spent the previous week reading my grandfather's journals. I recognized the pattern now. What do you want, Dad? The question landed harder than I intended. His eyes narrowed slightly, then relaxed. We're family. There it was. Another familiar phrase. Family. The word appeared every time money entered a conversation. Every single time. Michael finally spoke. You don't have to be hostile. I turned toward him. For the first time since they'd arrived. Hostile. His jaw tightened. Nobody is fighting. I looked at my father. Then back at him. You stood there while he disowned me. Silence. Michael looked away. Exactly as he had that day? My father intervened quickly. We're not here to discuss that. Of course not. Because discussing that would require accountability. We're here to discuss your grandfather. And there it was. The truth. Finally. Not me. Not the baby. Not reconciliation. The estate. I leaned back in my chair. My grandfather's chair. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. What about him? My father's posture changed. Subtle. But noticeable. The performance dropped slightly. $35 million is a tremendous responsibility. I almost smiled. Not because it was funny. Because it was predictable. You've always had responsibilities, Emily. I waited. So perhaps this situation should be approached as a family. There it was. The proposal. Not stated directly. Not yet. But approaching. I looked at Michael. He was watching me carefully. The same way gamblers watch cards being dealt. Then my father finally said it. The money should benefit everyone. I nodded slowly. There it is. At last. The actual reason for the visit. Not concern. Not regret. Money. 35 million reasons. The conversation continued for nearly an hour. My father talked about unity, legacy, family obligations, shared responsibility. Every argument sounded reasonable in isolation. Together they formed something else entirely. Entitlement. The assumption that my grandfather's decision required correction. Eventually they left. But not before my father delivered one final sentence. You should think carefully before making permanent decisions. A warning disguised as advice. After they drove away, I returned to the study. For a long time, I simply sat there, thinking. Then my phone rang. Gordon Reeves. His timing was remarkable. Emily. Hi, Gordon. His voice sounded unusually serious. Immediately, my stomach tightened. What happened? There has been a legal filing. The room suddenly felt smaller. What kind of filing? A challenge. I closed my eyes. Of course. My father wasn't asking for money. He was preparing to take it. He filed already. This morning. I laughed softly. Not because anything was funny. Because it confirmed everything. The visit. The apology. The concern. The family speech. All theater. The legal attack had already begun before he arrived. What are they claiming? Gordon sighed. Several pages rustled in the background. They argue that your grandfather was influenced during the final revision of the estate plan. I sat upright. What? They claim the distribution is unreasonable. My grandfather had spent 40 years commanding soldiers, managing multi-million-dollar operations, making life and death decisions. Yet somehow they wanted a court to believe he didn't understand his own will. The argument was insulting, but it was also dangerous. Can they win? No. The certainty in Gordon's voice helped, but that doesn't mean they won't try. I stared toward the mountain ridge outside. Storm clouds gathered beyond the trees, dark and heavy. What happens now? Another pause. Then Gordon answered. There is something else. My heartbeat quickened. What? One of the final documents your grandfather left has been reviewed. I frowned. What document? A recording. The word immediately caught my attention. A recording? Yes, my grandfather had apparently recorded a private conversation several years earlier. A conversation involving my father. The contents had remained sealed until now, protected under specific instructions. My pulse quickened. What does it say? I haven't listened to it personally. Another pause. But I know who is speaking. My father. And my grandfather. I felt a chill run through me. Because suddenly I understood. My grandfather hadn't merely left evidence. He had anticipated this exact moment. The challenge. The lawsuit. The greed. The denial. All of it. As though he had been watching events unfold years before they happened. When can I hear it? Soon. The storm finally broke outside. Rain struck the windows. Wind moved through the trees. And for the first time since arriving in Asheville, I felt absolutely certain about something. My father wasn't fighting for justice. He wasn't protecting family. He wasn't honoring my grandfather's memory. He was trying to take what had never belonged to him. And somewhere inside the documents my grandfather left behind was the proof. 2 weeks later, Gordon called again. This time his voice carried no uncertainty. Only facts. The hearing date had been scheduled. My father's challenge was officially moving forward. And now there would be a judge, a courtroom, and a recording that neither side could ignore. The battle my grandfather predicted had finally begun. The hearing took place on a Tuesday morning in Charlotte. By then I was nearly 5 months pregnant, far enough along that strangers smiled when they noticed, far enough along that I could sometimes feel small movements late at night when the world became quiet. Those moments had changed me. Not dramatically, not all at once, but steadily. The way sunrise changes a landscape, slowly, then completely. I arrived at the courthouse with Gordon Reeves and 2 members of his legal team. The building itself wasn't impressive. Gray stone, tall windows, security checkpoints, the kind of place where life-changing decisions happen in rooms that look surprisingly ordinary. My father was already there. So was Michael. Neither approached me. Neither offered a greeting. For reasons I couldn't entirely explain, that hurt less than it once would have. Because somewhere during the previous 2 months, I had stopped hoping they would become different people. Acceptance isn't forgiveness. Acceptance is simply seeing reality clearly. And reality was standing 20 feet away wearing a navy suit and pretending not to look at me. The hearing began shortly after 9. The judge was a woman in her 60s, sharp-eyed, calm, efficient. The type of person who had probably heard every family argument imaginable. My father's attorney spoke first. He argued that the estate distribution was unreasonable, that General Carter's final decisions were inconsistent with prior plans, that family expectations had been disrupted. I listened quietly. The words sounded polished, professional, persuasive even. If someone knew nothing about my family, they might have believed them. Then Gordon stood, and everything changed. Facts have a peculiar power. They don't shout. They don't perform. They simply exist. One document after another entered the record. Financial statements, property records, correspondence, trust revisions, my grandfather's journals, years of evidence, years of observations, years of concern. The picture became impossible to ignore. My grandfather hadn't acted impulsively. He had acted carefully, methodically, deliberately. Then came the recording. The courtroom became noticeably quieter when Gordon introduced it. Even my father seemed uncomfortable. The audio wasn't perfect. The conversation had occurred years earlier, but every word was understandable. My grandfather's voice filled the room first. Older, slower, yet unmistakably firm. Then my father's voice appeared, and with it came the moment that changed everything. Michael needs the money. My father sounded frustrated, tired, defensive. My grandfather responded, Michael needs accountability. Several seconds passed. Then my father said the sentence that seemed to drain all the air from the room. Emily can take care of herself. I felt something twist inside my chest. Not because I had never heard the sentiment before, because this time it was undeniable. Recorded. Permanent. Real. The recording continued. My grandfather's voice remained calm, measured, disappointed. One day you'll lose the only child who truly loves you. Silence followed. Long enough to become uncomfortable. Long enough to become truth. The recording ended. Nobody spoke immediately. Even the judge sat quietly for a moment. The kind of silence that appears when everyone in a room understands something important at exactly the same time. My father stared at the table. For the first time all morning he looked old. Not physically, emotionally. Like a man suddenly confronted by every decision he spent years avoiding. The remainder of the hearing moved quickly. The legal arguments that once seemed strong began collapsing under the weight of evidence. By mid-afternoon the judge delivered her ruling. The challenge was denied. Completely. The estate remained exactly as my grandfather intended. $35 million. Every cent. Legally mine. The decision should have felt overwhelming. Victorious. Life-changing. Instead I felt strangely calm. Because somewhere along the way the money had stopped being the point. The truth had become the point. And the truth was now public. Official. Permanent. The hearing ended. People began gathering documents. Chairs moved. Conversations resumed. Then Gordon handed me one final envelope. I recognized the handwriting immediately. My grandfather. My throat tightened. What is this? The last letter. I stared at it. This was supposed to be opened after the hearing. My hands trembled slightly as I unfolded it. The courtroom faded. The conversations disappeared. For a moment it felt like it was just me and him again. Emily, if you are reading this, then you finished what I asked of you. More importantly, you finished it honestly. Money can be inherited. Character cannot. I paused. Already fighting tears, the letter continued. Your father inherited my name. You inherited my trust. Never confuse the two. I read the sentence twice. Then a third time. Because somehow those words explained everything. The inheritance. The condition. The journals. The letters. The recordings. My grandfather hadn't been protecting money. He had been protecting values. The values he believed would survive after he was gone. When I finally looked up, I realized my vision had blurred. For a moment, I simply sat there, holding the letter, missing him, loving him, thanking him. A few minutes later, I walked outside. The afternoon sun had finally broken through the clouds. My father stood alone near the courthouse steps. Michael was gone. The attorneys were gone. Just the two of us remained. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then he looked at me. Not angry. Not hostile. Just tired. Emily? His voice sounded smaller than I remembered. I waited. He swallowed. I made mistakes. The sentence came years too late. But it came. I nodded. Yes. His eyes dropped briefly. Then returned to mine. I want another chance. There it was. The thing he should have asked for long before the lawsuit. Long before the inheritance. Long before the rejection. I looked at him carefully. The man who had raised me. The man who had failed me. The man who was both things at the same time. Then I thought about my daughter. About the future. About the family I intended to build. And finally I answered. You rejected her before she was even born. Tears appeared in his eyes. I continued. My grandfather never did. For a moment neither of us moved. Then I turned and walked away. Not because I hated him. Because some journeys only move forward. 1 year later, my daughter entered the world on a warm July morning. 7 pounds, bright eyes. Strong lungs. Perfect. I named her Charlotte. Not after a family member. Not after a tradition. Simply because Ethan once told me he loved the name. The inheritance changed our lives. Of course it did. Pretending otherwise would be dishonest. But the greatest gift my grandfather left wasn't financial. It was clarity. The ability to see people as they truly are. And to understand my own worth regardless of their opinions. Today, Charlotte is sleeping in the room down the hall as I tell you this story. Sometimes I watch her and think about everything that had to happen for us to arrive here. A mountain house. A box of letters. A courtroom. A grandfather who believed in me. And a father who taught me one final lesson without ever intending to. The people who underestimate your value are often the people most afraid of discovering it. If this story touched you, I'd genuinely love to hear your thoughts. What would you have done in my position? Have you ever had to choose between protecting your peace and holding on to a relationship? Leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. Stories connect us in ways we rarely expect. And if you enjoy heartfelt family dramas like this one, subscribe and join us for more journeys every week. Until next time, take care of yourselves and the people who truly deserve your love.